Look, I need to get this off my chest because everyone keeps acting like I'm the villain here, and honestly, I'm so tired of pretending I care what anyone thinks anymore. I'm Bethany, I'm 28, and yeah, my marriage just exploded in the most spectacular way possible, but here's the thing, nobody wants to hear. Maybe it needed to happen. Everyone's so quick to point fingers at me, but where was all this concern when I was slowly dying inside a boring marriage to a man who couldn't even make me feel like a woman? It all started during what was supposed to be our relaxing family vacation. Cole, my husband of 5 years, had this brilliant idea to stay with his sister Jenna instead of going somewhere actually fun like I wanted. I suggested the beach, maybe somewhere with actual nightlife, but no. Cole's always worried about money, always talking about being responsible and saving for the future. So there we were, stuck in Jenna's suburban nightmare with her perfect little family and her judgmental looks every time I ordered another glass of wine at dinner. She's one of those women who thinks she's better than everyone because she bakes cookies from scratch and has her kids on some organic diet. Anyway, Jenna needed to borrow a laptop for some work thing, and Cole offered his old one. When they ran into technical problems, I offered my old USB drive to help with whatever computer nonsense they were dealing with. Cole got this weird look and asked if I was sure, like I was hiding state secrets or something. I just rolled my eyes and told him to stop being paranoid about everything. The man acts suspicious about the most innocent things, always asking where I've been or what I'm doing. But then when I actually need him to pay attention to me, he's glued to his phone or talking about work. The USB drive was actually Ryan's old one from back when we dated. I'd kept it for sentimental reasons. You know how it is when you have history with someone. There were old photos and memories on there, things that reminded me of a time when someone actually made me feel alive and wanted. But when I handed it to Cole, I genuinely forgot about the personal stuff on there. Looking back, maybe part of me wanted him to find something, wanted him to finally see that other men had found me irresistible when he barely seems to notice I exist. When Cole started going through the drive and his whole demeanor changed, I knew immediately what he'd found. And you know what my first thought was? Not guilt, not embarrassment. I was angry. Furious, actually. Here I was trying to help his sister, and he's snooping through my personal files like some kind of detective. The look on his face was a mixture of hurt and disgust. And all I could think was how dare he judge me for my past when he's never even tried to understand who I really am. I started preparing my defense before he even said anything. In my mind, I was already crafting the argument about how this was his fault for being nosy, how he had no right to judge me for things I did before we were even serious. Because that's the truth. Cole's never been confident enough to handle being with someone like me, someone who's experienced and knows what she wants. He's always been intimidated by the fact that I had a life before him. The confrontation happened that same night, and Cole did not disappoint in terms of being completely predictable. He came into our room with this serious expression and started asking me about what he'd found on the drive. Not just asking, interrogating really. He wanted to know about specific things he'd seen, specific acts that I'd done with Ryan that I've never done with him. And the way he asked, like he had some right to an explanation, like I owed him some detailed confession about my past relationship. I immediately went on the offensive, because, honestly, what he was doing was creepy and invasive. I asked him what kind of person watches intimate videos of their wife with another man. What kind of sick jealousy drives someone to sit there and analyze every detail like some kind of pervert? When I called him out for being a jealous creep, he got defensive and started talking about how hurt he was, how betrayed he felt. Betrayed by what? By the fact that I had a life before him? I told him straight up that he was slut-shaming me, that he was trying to make me feel bad for being a sexual person before I met him. The specific things he brought up, the acts he'd seen me do with Ryan that I don't do with him, I mean, what did he expect me to say? With Ryan, everything felt natural and exciting because he was exciting. He made me want to be adventurous, made me want to explore and experiment. With Cole, those same things feel forced and uncomfortable because the energy is completely different. But I couldn't exactly explain that to Cole without destroying him completely. So I did what any smart woman would do. I flipped the script. I told him he was remembering things wrong, that his jealousy was making him paranoid and irrational. When he insisted he knew what he'd seen, I accused him of being obsessed with my past in an unhealthy way. The truth is, with Ryan, I felt like myself. I felt beautiful and desired and worth pursuing. Ryan made me feel like a goddess, like someone worth fighting for, worth being passionate about. Everything we did together felt like this amazing expression of how much he wanted me. With Cole, even our best moments feel routine and obligatory. He's never made me feel like I'm this irresistible woman who drives him crazy with desire. When Cole started getting emotional about not being good enough for me in bed, I lost my patience completely. I told him he was being dramatic, that he was making everything about himself instead of considering how his jealousy and insecurity were affecting me. I called him boring and vanilla because that's what he is. Ryan had this confidence, this natural dominance that made me want to submit to him. Cole has never had that energy, has never made me feel like he's this powerful, irresistible man who deserves my complete surrender. The whole fight escalated from there, with Cole getting more emotional and me getting more frustrated with his inability to take responsibility for his own shortcomings. I finally stormed out because I couldn't deal with his self-pity and his attempts to make me feel guilty for having standards. I immediately texted my friend Kayla and told her what was happening, how Cole was being controlling and judgmental about my past. The next few days were absolutely unbearable because Cole turned into this moody, passive-aggressive version of himself that made our entire vacation miserable. He would barely talk to me, would give me these cold looks, and would make these subtle digs about trust and honesty that were obviously directed at me. I decided I wasn't going to play into his victim narrative, so I doubled down on my position. I told him that my past relationships were none of his business, and that his obsession with them was unhealthy and controlling. What really bothered me was how Cole started treating our intimate moments like some kind of test. Every time we were together, I could feel him analyzing everything, comparing it to what he'd seen, looking for signs that I was holding back. It was completely unsexy and made me want to avoid physical intimacy altogether. I started pulling away from him physically because the whole situation had become so uncomfortable and loaded with his expectations. Around this time, I made a decision that I'm sure everyone's going to judge me for, but honestly, I don't care anymore. I reached out to Ryan, not because I was planning anything inappropriate, but because I needed to talk to someone who actually understood me. Someone who remembered what I was like when I was truly happy and fulfilled. Cole's constant moodiness and passive-aggressive behavior were driving me crazy, and I needed perspective from someone who had actually seen the best version of me. Ryan was surprised to hear from me, but he was sweet about it, asked how I was doing, seemed genuinely interested in my life. We started texting back and forth, just casual conversation at first, but it felt so good to talk to someone who wasn't analyzing every word I said or looking for hidden meanings in everything. Ryan remembered me as this confident, exciting woman, and talking to him reminded me that I used to be that person before Cole slowly drained all the life out of me. When Cole noticed I was on my phone more, texting and seeming happier, he immediately became suspicious and started asking questions. More interrogations, more attempts to control and monitor what I was doing. I told him he was being paranoid and controlling, that I had every right to have friends and conversations that didn't include him. The conversations with Ryan started innocent enough, but they quickly reminded me of what it felt like to be truly appreciated by a man. He remembered specific things about me, things that had made me special to him, ways I'd made him feel that he'd never forgotten. He told me I'd been the most passionate, exciting woman he'd ever been with. That he'd been an idiot to let me go. And hearing that, after years of feeling invisible and unappreciated in my marriage, was like oxygen to someone who'd been suffocating. Ryan asked me if I was happy, really happy, and for the first time in years I had to honestly think about that question. Was I happy, or was I just comfortable? The more I talked to Ryan, the more I realized that my marriage wasn't just stale, it was suffocating. Cole didn't want a partner, he wanted a complement to his boring life. Someone who would fit into his vision of suburban respectability without challenging him or expecting him to grow. When Cole confronted me about my secretive texting behavior, I felt this surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. Here was this man who had spent our entire vacation sulking about my past, making me feel guilty for things I'd done years before I met him. And now he had the audacity to question my right to have private conversations with friends. I told him he was being controlling and possessive, that his jealousy was becoming a serious problem in our marriage. The coffee date with Ryan was supposed to be innocent, just two old friends catching up in person after all our texting. But the moment I saw him walk into that little cafe downtown, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. That flutter of genuine excitement, that spark of real attraction. Ryan looked good. Really good, and the way he smiled when he saw me made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the room. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and it felt so natural, so easy, so completely different from the strained conversations I'd been having with Cole. When Ryan suggested we continue our conversation over dinner, I knew I was crossing a line, but honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not Cole's wife, not the responsible woman who always did the right thing, but Bethany, the woman who used to be spontaneous and exciting. Dinner turned into drinks, and drinks turned into this amazing conversation about life and relationships and dreams we'd both put on hold. Ryan told me that ending things with me had been one of his biggest regrets, that he'd never found anyone who challenged him and excited him the way I had. When Ryan suggested we go back to his place to continue talking, I said yes without hesitation. And what happened there felt inevitable. Felt right in a way that nothing in my marriage had felt for years. Afterward, lying there with Ryan, I felt this overwhelming sense of clarity. This was what had been missing from my life. This was what I'd been settling for less than. This was what I deserved to feel every day. I didn't feel guilty. I felt awakened, like I'd been sleepwalking through my marriage and finally remembered what it was like to be truly awake. The next few weeks were like living a double life, and honestly, it was the most alive I'd felt in years. I was seeing Ryan regularly, making excuses to get out of the house, creating elaborate stories about where I was going and who I was with. Ryan and I weren't just having an affair. We were planning a future together. He talked about all the things we could do, all the places we could go, all the ways we could build a life that actually excited us both. During this time, I became increasingly cold toward Cole, and I could see it was affecting him, but I couldn't bring myself to care. He'd had 5 years to make me feel special, 5 years to be the kind of husband who inspired loyalty and devotion, and he'd failed. When Cole suggested marriage counseling, I almost laughed out loud. What was a therapist going to do, wave a magic wand and suddenly make Cole interesting? I told him it was a waste of money, that our problems were too fundamental to be solved by sitting in some office, talking about our feelings. The day Cole found out about my affair was actually liberating, even though he tried to make it into this huge, dramatic confrontation. Finally, one of our mutual friends saw me with Ryan and told him. When Cole confronted me with the information, he was expecting tears, denials, some kind of desperate attempt to save our marriage. Instead, I felt this incredible sense of relief that I could finally stop pretending. I admitted everything without hesitation. Yes, I'd been seeing Ryan. Yes, we'd been intimate. Yes, I'd been lying about where I was going and who I was with. And then I told Cole exactly why it had happened, exactly what had been missing from our marriage that Ryan was able to provide. I laid out every way Cole had failed as a husband, every way he'd made me feel unappreciated and unfulfilled. Cole tried to act shocked, like this was all coming out of nowhere, but honestly, how could he be surprised? I told him straight up that Ryan appreciated me in ways Cole never had, that Ryan made me feel like the passionate, exciting woman I'd always been before I'd buried that part of myself to accommodate Cole's limitations. When Cole said our marriage was over, I felt nothing but relief. Finally, he was being honest about what we both knew. that this relationship had been dead for years. I told him I wanted a divorce without any hesitation, because why would I want to stay married to someone who couldn't inspire the best in me? I moved out that same week and went to stay with Ryan temporarily while I figured out my next steps. Being in Ryan's space, waking up next to someone who actually desired me, planning our future together. It felt like stepping out of a black and white movie into full color. This was what life was supposed to feel like. I started posting on social media about choosing happiness over security, about not settling for less than you deserve, about having the courage to chase what truly fulfills you. The divorce proceedings started immediately, and I was confident that I'd be able to get a fair settlement that would allow me to start fresh with Ryan. During this time, Ryan and I started making concrete plans for our life together. We talked about moving to a different city, somewhere with more excitement and opportunity. Looking back, I regret nothing about my choices during this period. I'd spent too many years being the woman Cole wanted me to be, instead of the woman I actually was. When I finally chose myself, chose my own happiness over everyone else's expectations, it felt like coming alive after years of being half dead. But then everything started falling apart in ways I never could have predicted. Ryan started pulling away about 3 months after I moved in with him. And at first I thought it was just stress from work or adjustment to living together. But then he started making comments about how intense our relationship had become, how he felt like I was expecting too much, too fast, how maybe we'd rushed into things without thinking them through properly. Then one night, Ryan came home and just blurted it out. He didn't think our relationship was working. He felt like we'd gotten caught up in the excitement of the affair, without really thinking about whether we were compatible for the long term. He said he'd realized that what made our relationship exciting was the forbidden nature of it, the thrill of sneaking around. Now that it was just regular, everyday life, the magic was gone. When I pressed him for a real explanation, Ryan got brutal. He told me that being with a married woman had been thrilling, but being with a divorced woman who'd left her husband for him felt like too much pressure, too much responsibility. He said my constant need for validation and attention was exhausting, that I was too high maintenance and dramatic for a real relationship. Ryan told me he wanted me to move out, that he needed space, that maybe we could still be friends, but he couldn't handle the intensity of a serious relationship with me. And just like that, everything I'd sacrificed my marriage for disappeared. I was furious, devastated, completely blindsided by how quickly everything had fallen apart. I'd given up my marriage, my home, my stability, my reputation, all for a man who'd never actually intended to build a real life with me. The divorce settlement was a disaster. Cole's lawyer had evidence of my affair, which limited what I could claim. I had to move back in with my parents at 28 years old, which was humiliating beyond words. The worst part was seeing Cole move on so quickly and successfully. Through mutual friends and social media, I could see that he was thriving without me. He'd gotten promoted at work, started working out, seemed happier and more confident than he'd been in years. And then, less than a year after our divorce was finalized, he started dating someone new. Watching Cole with his new girlfriend was torture. She was everything I wasn't. Sweet, uncomplicated, genuinely supportive, the kind of woman who seemed happy to build a quiet, stable life with someone. And Cole was different with her, more attentive and romantic than he'd ever been with me. It was like seeing him become the husband I'd always wanted him to be, just not for me. My dating life became a series of disasters. The men I met online seemed to sense my desperation, my bitterness, my complete lack of stability. I couldn't connect with anyone the way I thought I deserved to, couldn't find anyone who appreciated my intensity and complexity the way I needed them to. But even as my life fell apart around me, even as everything I'd thought I wanted disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to admit that I'd made mistakes. Instead, I doubled down on blaming everyone else. Cole for being boring, Ryan for misleading me, my friends for not being supportive enough. It was easier to believe that the world was wrong about me than to examine whether my choices and expectations had been unrealistic. I started telling anyone who'd listen that I'd dodged a bullet with Cole, that his new relationship proved how boring and conventional he really was, that I was better off without someone who couldn't handle a passionate, exciting woman. I convinced myself that Ryan had done me a favor by showing his true colors before I wasted even more time with someone who wasn't worthy of me. So I stayed angry and bitter and convinced that everyone else was the problem. Cole was too boring to appreciate me. Ryan was too immature to handle a real woman. My friends were too conventional to understand someone who was willing to fight for her happiness. Now, 3 years later, I'm still living with my parents, still working a job that barely pays my bills, still watching Cole build the life I thought I didn't want with someone who seems perfectly happy to want it. And instead of learning from what happened, I'm still convinced that I was right about everything. I still believe that I deserved better than what Cole could give me, that I was justified in looking elsewhere for what was missing in my marriage, that choosing my own happiness over everyone else's expectations was the right thing to do. The fact that it all blew up in my face doesn't mean I was wrong. It just means that other people couldn't handle being with someone who knew her worth and refused to compromise. The problem wasn't my choices. The problem was that I'm apparently too much woman for most men to handle. I'm too passionate, too intense, too honest about what I want and need from a relationship. Men like the idea of being with someone like me, but when it comes to the reality of meeting my needs and matching my energy, they always fall short. So yeah, I'm alone now, and yeah, my life didn't turn out the way I planned, but at least I didn't settle for a boring, passionless marriage with someone who took me for granted. At least I chose myself, chose my own happiness, refused to shrink myself down to fit into someone else's limited vision of what a wife should be. And if that makes me the villain in everyone else's story, well, at least I know who I really am.